Welcome back to the Trending Communicator. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. Sometimes I think the rise of public affairs tells you everything about where communications is headed. Companies are collapsing their silos. Corporate comms, investor relations, government relations, sometimes research and insights, all rolling up into a public affairs umbrella. Now, it makes sense when you realize that every stakeholder is now connected to every other stakeholder. Your employees or your investors and your regulators or your community members, the lines are blurred or don't exist anymore. But with this expanded remit comes exponentially more complexity. Public affairs practitioners are now responsible for navigating fractured audiences, unpredictable political swings, cultural sensitivities that shift by the hour. You need to be creative, engaged, authentic, all while knowing that one misread of the room could trigger a cascade that threatens your entire license to operate. Modern public affairs isn't about managing separate stakeholder groups. It's about recognizing they're all connected. Well, fortunately, there's someone who's been operating at this intersection for 25 years or more before we even called it public affairs. He guided the W.K. Kellogg Foundation through their Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation initiative. When Papa John's faced their reckoning, when the National Education Association needed to demonstrate value in a hostile environment, when UnitedHealth Group needed someone who understood government programs and public trust during peak scrutiny, they all turned to the same strategist. His approach? What he calls calm, clarity, and precision. His firm, the Creshiem Group, is named after a Philadelphia trail that connects separated neighborhoods, and that metaphor matters. His career reads like he saw this convergence coming. 16 years at Weber Shandwick, rising to EVP, then a pivot to UnitedHealth Group as SVP of government programs, getting that inside view of how public affairs works within the most scrutinized sectors. Now he's running his own advisory, the Creshiem Group. We're going to dig into how you navigate this expanded public affairs mandate when every decision ripples across every constituency. Making his debut on the Trending Communicator, the principal of the Creshiem Group, Emil Hill. Emil, it is good to see you.
Good to see you, Daniel. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have this opportunity to talk to you and your audience.
Yeah, it's great to see you. And, it's interesting. Many things are interesting, but I can't believe you've been outside of my radar for so long. I mean, we've been kind of running in somewhat similar circles, for decades. I guess PR is pretty big after all, I always think it's a small kind of insular world, and sometimes it is ideologically, and we might get to that, but we're really a big community. And, I'm glad that we finally did connect. The impressive work that you've done that people who don't know you have experienced or know about, right? All comes from that, that public affairs horse sense, know-how, I don't know what you want to call it. But just that idea that look, all these things connect to one another. And that kind of, I think, is the thread that goes through so many of the activities that we recommend and the kind of solutions that we provide. So enough for preamble. I just wanted to kind of recognize you for coming and thank you very much again for being here.
Thank you. I'm excited about it. I would love to tell you that I had foresight, and this has been my lifetime dream since I was a kid. It was not. It really, truly happenstance. I studied finance in undergrad. I was a business administration major, and you probably couldn't have told me that I wasn't going to be an investment banker or some sort of banker at some point in my life. I decided to become a consultant, and I think at the very early part of my life, I learned that I like to solve problems, difficult problems. And in order to graduate from college, a phenomenal chair of the finance department at Morehouse, Dr. John Williams, insisted that we not only be able to solve these mathematical equations about the time value of money or how to calculate beta risk in a company's portfolio, you had to be able to explain the formula and all of the things associated with it. and in a contemporary environment based on what was going on in the news. And I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
And fortunately for me and a group of my friends that studied together, we did really well on our final exam and got our degrees. I think that when I got into management consulting and I did the same thing, took complex problems and simplified them in a way that everyday people could understand. And so my journey to Washington and all these years doing public affairs, I think I've been able to communicate with corporate leaders inside and outside of companies because I had a way to learn complex things and then try to simplify them. And at my core, I told you I studied finance. I'm a problem solver. And so whenever communications tools are at my disposal and understanding issues and that's truly what public affairs is, and it has always been.
I've heard a similar tale more often than not recently from leaders in our profession, from people who kind of fell into PR and into public affairs and into communications. They didn't set out to be communicators. They didn't set out to be like, oh, I want to be at the head of Weber Shandwick or whatever it is. They set out to either solve problems or to tell truth about something, or to occasionally be, in some cases, to just tell great stories. But they set out to ultimately, I think, just like you said, to solve problems that are really, really hard to solve and that are hard to quantify. And another kind of thread that kept running through things is some of the really successful folks, at least in the corporate world, they talk about the importance of business acumen and of just really understanding the businesses that you're working with, because if you don't have that strategic context, how can you offer a solution? And how can you be respected, or how can you have the authority and the license to operate, right? And what you said really kind of, I didn't realize that you came into this whole thing with a finance degree, and it makes sense though. It makes sense because you've really been advising folks at the top for a considerable amount of time. And I mean, a large portion of that must be because you innately, or you by hard work, understand their business and understand what they're going for.
I don't know if you can really be a good partner to any client if you don't immerse yourself in their business, understand who their competitors are, try to get a sense for their DNA, and try to advise based on those understandings. If you don't have that, then you're going to fall short every time. And I think some of the smartest people I've ever met in communications, and I still know a lot of finance people who I think are smart, but I think across businesses that the best communicators, and that means the people that could explain what it is they're attempting to do to their shareholders, to their customers, to their employees, run the most effective businesses. I think you see the cracks, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, is when a crisis arises or when there's a misstep. And, a lot of organizations want to, as quickly as possible, extinguish that problem to make sure their stock price continues to go up. And don't always want to diagnose where the challenges might be. And it is usually because at some place in your organization, your values aren't being met. And it either upsets an investor, particularly an activist, or a significant portion of your customer base. And those aren't problems that you're able to solve quickly. Those are problems that require organizational awareness and a decision at the highest levels that we're going to address those issues. And sometimes, it could take longer than you think you have as an executive that is concerned about a dipping share price.
Yeah, sometimes, and it often does take longer, especially for those executives who know that they're on a clock, and the next board meeting's around the corner, and there's hell to pay, and there's got to be some heads rolling, and sometimes that happens, and that makes it very, very hard effectively run a crisis program and really kind of diagnose what the problems are, as you said. But as you were talking about that, one of the things that we talked about, or that I talked about in the intro, is this whole consolidation or kind of amalgamation of different parts of what were traditionally communications, and even a few little extras. I don't mean to be diminutive about insights and research, but just the remit is changing and expanding. Do you think that partly the way that companies have dealt with crises, do you think that's partly one of the contributors to that consolidation, or what else do you think is driving that consolidation?
Look, I think there are a number of factors that are driving it. One, we live in an era where news travels so incredibly fast. And when you think about when you and I were growing up, you got a sense for what was going on in the morning. Maybe if your parents had the radio on and you were listening, and that was pretty local. Mm-hmm. And then in the evening when Walter Cronkite or one of those guys came on, you got a national and a global perspective about things. And then you heard about the larger corporations. And if you were really sharp as a kid, or your parents insisted, you were reading your local newspaper.
Yeah.
We've moved from an era where you read your local newspaper and listened to local news to an era where you read a national or regional paper that summarizes whatever. You pick your cable outlet of choice, and younger people don't use any of those things. They're getting their news across TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and X and any number of their favorite influencers who speak in a way that they can understand. So as an organization trying to navigate through this malaise, this policy implications to your business, the viability of your business and sustainability, to something happening in your store or within your hospital system that seems like a small thing, but when somebody is carrying around a supercomputer all day, and there are thousands of them, and they turn into man or women on the street reporting on a story, you've got to be prepared to respond in appropriate manner to those small things that are big, that say a lot about your business. And because now your local congressman or senator or you're the mayor, and nowadays the president of the United States, looking at the same meme or the same news clip news clip on the phone that has gone viral, and they're talking about your business, and these people are regulating your business and looking at your business. You've got to respond to them, and you've got to respond to your customers who might decide, I don't want to buy your product anymore, or it doesn't represent me anymore. So if you go out half-cocked with a story or a response that doesn't in some way take in consideration the full complement of your audiences, or more importantly, your customers, including Wall Street, you've got a huge problem. And so, we've been in this business long enough to know when the investor relations guys and girls, they had nothing to do with what was going on with public affairs.
Yeah.
And the marketing people were, trying to sell said product or said perspective on the company. And the communications people were all the way over there trying to put out a fire. Now, with this new consolidation, fortunately for us, we've got a seat at the table, and now the top seat in many cases, and an opportunity to address the board, the C-suite, and take a look at the external communications, whether it's advertising, and the impact some of those things might have, so they don't appear tone deaf.
Yeah.
And to me, when I saw where this was at its height was during the pandemic. Sure. And all the things that were happening in the world where, companies had to respond, and then the so-called racial reckoning that occurred as well, you had a convergence of constituencies that had a perspective of everything a brand or organization or an association was saying or doing. And many corporations were not structured to be able to respond in a way that made sense for all of those constituencies. Now, I'm not going to say that you're ever going to be able to respond perfectly, but I think where we've landed now is you're able to do so in a way that takes into account the implications for a broader group of audiences, and you could tweak your regulatory language a little bit and be consistent. You can decide to table some commercials on a broad reach that you might not have before. You can suspend your social posts at a time if you can make a case to the leadership team, and now you can with this new structure of why this is important, and if you don't, what the implications are. So I think organizations are in a much better position nowadays, given this new construct, to be able to respond quickly enough to at least get back to even amongst their key audiences.
Yeah, much more quickly and smoothly. I mean, you know, as you're speaking, I envisioned Christmas tree lights, you know. Maybe this isn't the way it works anymore. And you know, God knows, everybody knows. It says there right there. I mean, you know, I'm Jewish. I don't have a tree. Well, I do have a tree. That's not true. I have a Costco plug-in tree. And for anybody out there who's like a Christmas tree purist, it's a miracle I have a tree at all. Being Jewish, my wife's Japanese. We do Japanese style Christmas. I'll talk about it some other time if anybody wants to know. But what I do know is, you know, all the times helping my friends, or going over my friends for Christmas tree decoration to their families and stuff. You remember the plug-in lights. You know, there's a string, one light bulb is out, the whole thing doesn't work, right? Or else you'd have to have multiple, you know, strings of lights, and somewhere like behind a tree, there'd be this crazy looking octopus of plugs. No wonder there were lots of tree fires back in the day, but we'd have this kind of like mess of plugs and stuff, and each one would go to a different string of lights. So that's, I think, what the communications / public affair, like that outward stakeholder relationship map might have looked like not too long ago, where, you know, okay, even if you unplug one, or even if there's one light bulb out, there's still 7 or 8 lights going on.
Yep, very true.
Maybe we can keep, you know, maybe things still stay bright, but now it's all connected in the one kind of continuous or even more continuous light. So when one bulb goes out, everybody knows. Everybody knows. And
Absolutely.
you can make that change very quickly. Was that like, how's that for a metaphor on the fly? I'm trying to do my thing here.
I absolutely love that metaphor. It is great.
And let's mark the day that I spoke about Christmas trees. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to take your metaphor and move it a step further along to say that not only do you know that it's that light and you can respond to it, you actually can measure the strength or the weakness of the other bulbs now, given the measurement tools and that are available for us today.
Yeah, that is a whole, like, measuring the output of light bulbs feels like I need an electrician to come in, but I see the metaphor. I am always excited about these different developments in measurement and how we're using technology to make that whole system flow even better and kind of get the warning signs when something is, you know, either shorting out or opening up, right? And when there's a surge of some kind, we can continue this metaphor forever. But yeah, that the advent, like, technology has definitely has definitely had a lot to do with this consolidation, because it's possible now. And do you see that in your day-to-day work? Are you really kind of working with technology a lot to make some of this stuff happen?
Yeah, look, you know, the beauty of AI from a communicator standpoint is I can keep up with multiple things in the way that I don't need an entire staff of people or a big agency to keep up with a range of issues. And what news is I can program AI to deliver me a report in the morning and another one in the afternoon about a range of issues and reports. And at my leisure, come through them. I have friends that work for data companies that help me
Oh, good for you.
and have a good sense for maps where things are flashing. And so often I refer my clients to them as a great source to make sure you have a true a couple of fingers on the pulse of your audiences and you measure it over time. Look, everybody wants to tell a good story and figure out the most effective way to do that as quickly as possible. And at some point, those stories stop resonating with your audiences, and you got to find a more creative approach to do that. I like to tell the story. My favorite learning was working for the Army on the Army of One and then the Army Strong campaign. It was very clear, and the Army's own brand group had determined that young people did not care about doing more before 9 a.m. than everybody else did all day. And they were more interested in believing that they could bring their individual skills and talents, whatever they were, be trained and be a contributor in America's army. The organization I was with, and I have to include myself in it, did not do a good enough job getting buy-in across the Army for that construct and the impact it was having. Now, we made mission every year, but if senior leaders across the organization did not like the individuality that sort of suggested to a new recruit, and every chance they got, whenever I sat down in any installation, I had to defend the campaign. And I largely think that's why we ended up, now lots of other things happened, moving away from that campaign and on to Army Strong, which, because of some incredibly smart and talented creators at McCann and an amazing leadership team across McCann and Weber Shandwick, we're able to figure out how to preview this new campaign with senior leaders across the Army and make an announcement at the Army's annual convention, the convention center, and unveil it in a way that evokes so much pride that the Army adopted it as if they'd come up with that. And I think that's why that was the key to our success. It was no longer the agency's campaign. It was the Army's actual campaign. And oh, by the way, it also worked. So, so the point I'm making this, I'm trying to make here is, look, trying to figure out what your audiences want is really important. And your internal audiences are as important as those external audiences. And so when you have communicators that understand your business, are interested in learning more about your audiences, and a leader that understands that he or she has a wide range of constituencies that they need to deliver messages to, I think that is the recipe for success. Also understanding what that organization's core values are. So when I talk about the Army of One and Army Strong, we thought we were hitting their core values, and we were. And we thought we had a message that certainly resonated with 18 to 34-year-old. We did. Where we lost was that key, and in this case, the most important audience was that internal audience, because at the end of the day, your best spokespeople are the people that are part of an organization. If they don't buy into it, you're going to ultimately have difficulty. So,
yeah. And it's an interesting story I mean, not only because of the success that it had ultimately with the Army, but it's a lesson that too many communicators maybe and marketers still have, I think, have difficulty taking to heart. And that lesson is everything really needs to look at the audiences. Like, you really have to start from audience research, understanding who your stakeholders are. You know, we can say audiences or stakeholders. Let's just say they're the same thing for the sake of argument. And, you know, I get it. You go into a job, you want to impress people. You're supposed to have the knowledge. You go in there and you say, this is what our message is. But who are you speaking for? Are you speaking for yourself? Are you speaking because you've read a book? Or are you speaking because you're intimately familiar with the audiences that this is going to reach and that is supposed to reach, and you know that are core and central to your business and to your organization? And there's always room to be creative and audacious and interesting and fun, or provocative. But you don't even know if you're going to be provocative unless you know what's going to provoke. Like, you have to understand the audience first.
I think that I agree 100% with that. I only want to take anything from the Army of One campaign because it was, today is the anniversary of 9/11, and that's essentially when it's born.
On this recording, yes, right.
And I was a profound impact on me because I was working to them at the time. Mm-hmm. And I think the takeaway is it worked.
Yeah.
The campaign was wildly successful. But if you can't convince your client, who's got to go to the mat for you day to day, and in this case, to get federal funds to be able to spend on one of the largest broad reach campaigns that runs every single year, period. Mm-hmm. You're not going to last for very long. And so the lesson I took from that is being creative and smart and right is one thing, but those things aren't the most important thing. If you can't explain to your client or your primary audience who's ultimately responsible, what this means, what it's going to do, and lay out the risks, then your intellect won't go far. And I think the biggest challenges I've had professionally, and I dare say probably most communicators, is, having a great idea and an approach that I can't sell or explain in a way that makes sense to the person that is ultimately responsible for the organization. So I spend a lot of time, and I'm sure most communicators do, sort of thinking through what are the questions my client is going to ask? What examples can I give him or her to explain why this would work? And what data do I have to back that up if it goes deeper? So I think communicators now, because of the convergence, understand that better than ever. Mm-hmm. And I think organization heads that are doing this consolidation realize that I need one stop to get us the pulse of what my stakeholders are thinking, doing, and how they feel about communications. And I can't go to the marketing person. I can't go to the investor relations person and I'm going to give 3 or 5 or 6 stories. And that's not helpful to my business or my interests in the long term.
Yeah. So you need to consolidate. And just the idea, though, that you can go into a meeting now, like today, in 2025, and not be able to explain like what the data is or what the rationale is or what the being able to persuade your stakeholder, your client or your audience, your executives, why they should go with what you're advocating, or why they should go with one of the things you're advocating, whatever it is. Now I don't think there's an excuse now to not be prepared for that. Not that there ever has been, But now you mentioned AI earlier. I mean, I always joke that, okay, you're the one who started the AI conversation. And that's what, we do always talk about here on the Trending Communicator. It's your fault. But I have found, at least in that respect, well, in many respects, but certainly in the respect of, all right, what evidence do I need? What data can I find, et cetera? I found that AI, and combined with a couple other research tools, right, have been incredible for me. And not only in helping me to show my clients and, my prospective partners what the upside is for anything I'm doing or why I think it's the right thing to do, but also to show me when I'm essentially full of shit and I'm not going down the right direction. No matter how cool the idea is, I'm sorry, there's no market for that. Or you're going to have a rough time with that, or your pricing point is far too high, whatever the answer is. Like, I find that interaction with having like my own personal board of directors, so to speak, in AI. And it's not always right. You have to always check, but it does help you kind of think things through a lot more than ever before.
Well, I think it forces rigor. And if you use it right, I think it's like anything else. And we talked about, calculating risk and time value of money earlier. Bad data in, bad data out. Poor analysis is poor analysis. So, I think the most effective and seasoned communicators learn how to leverage AI for what it is, a tool, and not this catch-all for anything and everything. I, like anybody else, I think I'm pretty smart. I think being a consultant and not having a large agency, you have fewer people to be able to bounce things off of. But I think what AI has done is put you in a position to get that counsel, or at least another perspective, backed up by data to support or refute whatever you're recommending. And it's only going to get better. Like, literally, I've watched over the last couple of years how much more data is available and how things have changed. And so I think it's an incredible tool that's only going to get better. And for people that are fearful that it's going to take jobs, it could, but a smart person, a seasoned person, will always have a seat at the table, because you've still got to interpret the information that it's providing you. And if you don't have experience with issues that are arising, I mean, we talked about a few crises that I worked on. I mean, you can't plug that stuff in a computer. I mean, you're going to get some scenarios, but there's some nuances, like, maybe I don't have as progressive of a shareholder that is interested in changing a brand around. And so I've got to deal with what I have in front of me. Maybe a general counsel has had experience like 5 or 6 other big lawsuits like this, and I don't know it because they've been able to keep this out of the paper. So when I'm recommending not settling because I put together some great analysis, it's still the people. And so, the tension often between the general counsel at a big company and a communications person.
Say it ain't so.
Their perspective is awesome, and it should be. They want to mitigate as much risk as possible. Yeah. And I remind them that, you've got the courts to consider, and I've got public opinion, and now that might have an outside view. And so if you want, I can put a dollar figure on what happens if your case doesn't go away, you can't settle it because it's in the news, and it won't go away, or it becomes, viral. And so that's not something that AI can tell you. That's something you have to know from, having your data and being able to present your case to your peers, and seeing what prevails based on recent experiences.
A friend of mine recently wrote on his Substack about, he's a neuroscientist, and he said something like, and I'm going to paraphrase, and forgive me, Michael Netzley, for butchering this, but He said something about your brain is your last secret weapon, right? It's your last and best weapon against losing your job or losing your livelihood or whatever. I mean, he didn't exactly put it that way. I kind of made the glass half empty there for a second. But he said that when he said that, when he wrote that, I've also been working a lot with the idea that domain expertise is your advantage. Like being an expert in a field, it's not enough, but being able to, I guess, amplify that expertise and bring it to bear when the moments are right is something that like AI can help you with, but it can't do. And you could, choose any number of scenarios. There's for 2.5 years or almost 3 years now, it's almost 3 years, only 3 since ChatGPT launched and kicked us off on this crazy adventure, even though AI has been around longer than that. In this short 3 years, we've heard from, if AI was launched the end of November of 2022, December 1st, 2022, we already saw all the blog posts, all the influencers, everybody out there saying, your job is over. You're going to lose your job. AI is coming to get you. And that's been the case now for 3 years. I agree with you. I don't think AI is going to take people's jobs necessarily. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's a lot more nuanced and very difficult to predict, simply because predictions are usually based on linear understanding of events, and you base on what's happened before. That's the way you kind of make predictions for the future. But most of those kind of people who make hay out of scaring the hell out of everyone, they don't know. They simply don't know, and they're not accounting for innovation, for developments. Great example, for example, PR professionals had been listed in a number of studies as like the number 2 or 3 profession at risk of being replaced by AI. And these are nonsense bullshit studies, I think. But like number 1 is always translation, by the way, which I kind of agree with. But okay, fine. So PR, in how are they defining PR? What does that mean? I don't know. But the point is, right, that was the way it was. Well, then all of a sudden, just a short while ago, we learn that, AI search, which is now a thing, has become a bigger thing and is going to continue to be a big thing, to the extent that Google is even arguing that it is the end of the open web, right? But AI search, GEO, whatever you want to call it, well, guess what? It relies a lot on earned media and on owned media. More on owned media than earned, but that's something I'm going to have to duke out with Muckrack. Anyway, earned media. Who does earned media? Who does reputation? Who does credibility? We do. Okay, now all of a sudden, wait a second. There's a growing need for senior PR people. What the hell? So don't listen to any of that nonsense. Things are going to change. There's always going to be evolutions, developments, right, that are going to affect the market and affect the way that that our careers or our jobs move. What we can control is how we interact in our own time, and certainly, I guess, at work, with the most advanced tools that are at our disposal. And whether or not we learn about them or how far we go with them is going to vary, but you got to do it. And that is how you insulate yourself against the vagaries of change, or the chaos of change, I suppose. Anyway, I didn't mean to go off that far. What I really was thinking, though, is, right, so now you have a public affairs, function, or corporate affairs. It's being consolidated. I keep saying public affairs. Public affairs is one part of it, but now instead of CCOs, you're having chief corporate affairs officers, CCAOs, and corporate affairs includes all these different things, And AI absolutely should be a massive enabler for this, especially when you're talking about smoothing out processes and workflows and communications between and amongst functions within a company. But that's operational mechanical. What I kept going back to is this something you said about poor analysis is poor analysis, like garbage in, garbage out, all this stuff, right? And follow me here for a second, because I'm going to make the segue that we talked about earlier. This poor analysis, garbage in, garbage out. You have to wonder, when you see what's going on out there in the media, with brands, and as of the time of this recording, we've just been through the Cracker Barrel thing and the Target stuff, and American Eagle is still sort of lived out there in the ether somewhere, and in the past several years, it's just been one thing after another with brands making what end up looking like massive missteps, and suffering the cost in the market, but from investors, from their consumers, depending. And you'd think that they would have the data, that they would have the confident information that would allow them to make the right kind of decisions or decide things. I mean, we've been talking about a few things before we started recording. Emil and I were talking about this, but we didn't mention Jaguar, for example, right? The Jaguar example of this what might be called audacious brand renewal and brand campaign. But I mean, I still can't believe my lying eyes on this one. Like, who's going to buy very gigantic purple cars that cost $150,000 that have no connection to Jaguar heritage and are not aimed at car buyers at all? Right? I mean, I just, maybe, I'm sure I'm missing a few things, and there's a lot more to that case. But I would have thought that tons and tons of research has gone into this. I just don't know the answers, and I guess we'll find out.
So there are
eventually.
a couple of things that I'd say about that. I want to touch on it. I don't work at Jaguar. Not sure what they're thinking. Here's what I would venture to guess. Sometimes organizations do things to get on the radar. It's audacious and it's bold. And, I don't know how much money it would take to push Jaguar, a British car maker, back into the conversation with some of the larger car makers and more established reputations, Mercedes, Porsche, Ford, GM, and now I guess Rivian is coming up there with Tesla. I think, I don't know what kind of research was done, but I'm guessing that it wasn't just about selling more of those cars. Yeah. I'm guessing that it probably was about having people talk about Jaguar again, which they're not doing now.
Right.
But they are now because people are looking at this.
Yeah.
So, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt because I think they, like any organization, they've been around for a while, they're smart, and they're probably, a little more desperate than, and I won't say desperate, but they're more open to creativity
probably
and
accurate,
doing unique things than they've been in the past. I would say, when you talk about what organizations do and why we won't be replaced in the near future anyway, I think organizations are made up of people who have experiences, things they believe. And oftentimes when you're a leader, you're able to impose that worldview on the entire organization. And sometimes it's good. There are different types of leaders.
For sure.
So, I think when I think about the fashion industry and the designers who lead those brands, they are largely the brand. Whether it's, Tom Ford or
Ralph Lauren,
Armani's passed away, or Ralph Lauren. These are people whose personal perspective drives those brands, and they are consistent. I think what we sometimes lose sight on, and I would take brands like NVIDIA, and probably Apple of yore, and I still love my Apple products, but Steve Jobs and the CEO, whose name is escaping me in NVIDIA, they are larger than life personalities.
Jensen Huang, yeah.
Jensen Huang, very smart people, and they've got a product that is right for the times that we're in, and they embody that and are able to communicate that. I think, there are lots of other organizations that don't have that and haven't identified that person. And so, notwithstanding the teams around them and whatever creatives around them, they are hampered sometimes from that. So I would take your Jaguar example and suspect that somebody has been unleashed and they're going to go down this path. And hopefully that new car will drive broader sales for the organization, not that one car.
Oh, but that's clearly what they're hoping for. And again, I don't claim to be a good prognosticator about any of these things. I just think that it still is hard. It's hard to make sense of some of this stuff. And well, I mean, that's why I'm doing the trending communicator and not future of brand. I mean, it's different thing. But I do think that there are audiences that we need to pay attention to, and then audiences that we maybe shouldn't pay so much attention to.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're listening to the audience that you shouldn't necessarily pay attention to is when the mistakes really or the missteps, start to happen, because you're misreading the grassroots or the real ultimate desires of your consumer base. And look, I suppose what I'm saying there is stop listening to the fringe people on social media and really do real research.
Do real research and understand who the key drivers of the efficacy of your brand. Like who's really impacting, reputation, stock price, and growth, and not the people that have an opinion today. I always think it's fascinating when someone that has no followers and a client says, this person wrote XYZ, it's not true. How are we able to do XYZ? And it keeps popping up. And I'm like, well, I don't know how that person got in your algorithm, but it looks like they have X number of followers. And while I'm not saying you should totally ignore him or her, let's monitor that person over time, see if there's some traction, and determine whether or not it's worth the time that we might spend addressing that person. I think, as communicators, we're in unique times with so much uncertainty, and organizations and leaders are looking for ways to mitigate that uncertainty in any way they can. And because so much of it in this environment is really out of their control. And so our job largely is to figure out how, based on what we know about their stakeholders, what we can do to help them manage their key stakeholders on an ongoing basis. And I think this consolidation is an important step to be able to do that. And the availability of data and what kind of data is available and how you can slice it up is really paramount.
Yeah. That connection between the different corporate affairs functions. And I have to stop saying public affairs. I have to start saying corporate affairs, because public affairs is within that umbrella.
Yep.
Now, gosh, Megan, I keep thinking about Megan Noel, who is a previous guest on the show, who really helped me to figure out, helped illustrate what the difference is, like what corporate affairs really is. And here I am saying public affairs again. The thing that keeps kind of sticking out to me here is, the disconnect with an audience before the consolidation, let's say, the disconnect with an audience might fester a lot longer, or might be underestimated or overestimated. misjudged, let's say, before those connections between and among the different groups and stakeholders were clearer, you know. But when you have a kind of broader view and you know, okay, a local Facebook group in the middle of nowhere is pissed off because your factory is stinking up the town. Your CEO is sending you these, you know, these urgent memos because he's seeing that the local person, the local group is saying terrible, nasty things about your company. And the reaction, or the kind of the tendency, if you didn't have an understanding of the insights of the various audience behaviors, of how the stakeholders that you know of, how the shareholders especially are going to look at that particular group, are they connected in any way to that group, right? If you know these things, then you could say, look, these people are upset because their town stinks. I'm not saying we don't do anything. But what I am saying is, let's monitor the situation on social, because I have a very strong feeling that it is not going to spread beyond this Facebook group. But we will know by monitoring if it does spread. We'll get the idea. In the meantime, here's the mitigation strategy that you affect locally. So you have to understand, right? This is where you need local, probably more of a public affairs outreach to the local elected officials and to the council people who are looking at the stinky air, and thinking about things, and you'd want to have local media on your side, et cetera. But, and we'll put a pin in local media because we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But it's this whole thing about this immediate need to react when you don't know all the players involved, and you just have this. You're almost indoctrinated by this point to think that some terrible comment about you, if it's digital, well, then it's certain to go viral and you're dead. You got to start preparing your apologies, and you got to start preparing, it's always goes to that kind of that extreme. And it's up to us to sort of counsel what is most likely to happen based on the research that we have, the data that we have, our understanding of those audiences, and how important it is to the business.
I agree. I think when you think about the new corporate affairs position and what it used to be like, you didn't necessarily, whether you were the head of communications, the head of public affairs, investor relations, none of those functions had access to the local person. You probably had a local PR person or a communicator in that area. He or she had a very specific function, and they laddered back up to that executive in that area, and probably never talked to headquarters at all. So you as a communicator could not reach into that until it really was a crisis. And by then it was too late. So now what you have the ability is to know what the sentiment is in markets where you serve all over the country because of availability of research and data.
Yeah.
So, and what you're also able to do is figure out what existing messaging. I suspect in your analogy, that local person had some kind of communications about that odor coming from that organization's factory or whatever. I suspect it no longer resonated. The concern that I would have had is, I don't want my local regulator in that region to now have an opinion about that before I know that this is a problem. And maybe I can send someone down there with more experience with our issue and deliver a message that, should it get out and spread, it is consistent with our values. What often used to happen is some rural communicator would say something. Next thing I know, I'm reading about it in the paper, and I'm trying to figure out where it came from and what I could do.
Imagine you're in that situation. You see something in the news, like in your monitoring reports, it says, the local representative of the company said, it doesn't stink that bad.
Oh my God.
Close your
I wish I
windows.
could tell you that didn't actually happen to
It
some of my
happens though.
clients.
I've seen much worse than that.
Yeah.
But like, it's all, that's part of the fun actually of our job when we get it right. And sometimes the answer is to get ahead of it, which is a pretty cool challenge. Like, all right, we have this stink problem. All right, how does that have any connection to our core business and our values? All right, well, if our values are to protect the environment, well, then we need to sort of maybe, kind of use this as a case study. But we have to have a plan. What's the plan? And so on. You need to know the business for this. And it's just, it goes on, and it's exciting exercise when it does happen. If you have the runway to do it. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's like, oh crap, we got to issue a holding statement until we figure things out. And it's it's always something. But one of the, in this sort of, as we wind down here, I did want to touch on something with you that we'd spoken about and that you even brought up earlier, is this idea of local news. And, I have this feeling that, even though the local paper, for example, may take time to revive if it does, the fracturing of media and the rise of Substack and kind of these independent journalists and so on is filtering down to regional and local levels. It's not the same thing as having a trained reporter in the local city council meetings.
Yeah.
But, it's an evolution. It's something. But it's a shame that the local news has disintegrated, not only because we need the information and it's really it's very relevant to us. We're local. The more local something is, the more relevant it is to you. And you automatically have a compelled audience. But it's because, like, it used to be, or it's supposed to be, the fact that when things get local, all the noise of national conversations and of something happening in, California, if you're in New Jersey, or something happening somewhere else, it doesn't interfere with that local level of news. News being everything ranging from zoning decisions to, crime reports on the local, what's happening locally, depends on how big your locality is, all the way through to hey, so-and-so's kid just set the record in track and field for the high school. Like, local news is that flavor. But nowadays, I don't think that that's separated as much. I think that the national does interfere a lot more with the local than it ever did before. But I don't know. You've mentioned to me that you're giving a lot of thought to this very specific area, and I think it is an important part. It will be even more important for GEO, for generative engine optimization, as we go. So why do you think all this is happening? We probably should have put a whole hour behind this one, but
we could have. I think, like styles come in and out. I think the media consolidation is real, and the costs to report locally and the demand for it has gone down, and not in the near term or recently commensurate with the return. Now, having said that, what I feel like is going to start happening is technology will allow for more digital communications, local communication. So, you think about Eater. When I go to another city, I immediately try to see what Eater says and that the people say about the restaurants in that particular city or that particular region. I think it's very, very effective, and it's going to be interesting to see. What I don't see on it is a lot of advertising from larger brands, quick service restaurants or fast casual, which, I'm sure isn't by accident because it's hiring restaurants, but I can imagine at some point they're going to figure out a way to get that. Now, I bring that up because of the point that you just raised. In the DC area where I am, I got 9, 4, and the CBS and local ABC, and I don't watch them as much for the reasons we talked about before. But I am craving a deeper dive into local news that the Washington Post cannot provide for me in Maryland about what's going on here that's not in the news. And it feels like with the evolution of technology, some enterprising business person is going to figure out a way to cobble together more information and news about particular parts of the country, city, state, and local in a way that we used to. Because when you think about it, I'm from Mount Airy, so that street that you talked about that I grew up on, that's the name of my company. There used to be a Mount Airy Express newspaper that my parents used to get, and they used to read about our community on top of the Inquirer and the Bulletin and the local news. And then there was a city paper, and all of those things have quietly gone away. And what I find I almost rely on more is what my friends on Facebook and Instagram are saying about the particular city.
Yeah.
So again, I think we're moving to a place where some industrious startup person is going to start that, because as a business, I want to be able to talk to my constituents all over the country more directly, and I think it's more effective. We've long since said that.
I'm going to put out an idea right now that just occurred to me, and I'm sure other people have thought of this, and I doubt that it's legal, because we've seen some things in the news about or in the in the media about regulatory decisions, et cetera, affecting or corporate decisions affecting note takers, like AI note takers, right? You have your Fireflies, your Otter, or whatever in your meetings, et cetera, et cetera. And it turns out that, wait a second, those are discoverable. If you're a compliance oriented company, you're not putting those in the meetings anymore. You're not allowing those in the meetings anymore, right?
Yeah.
But what if an enterprising company secured the permission of local governments and local organizations to place strategically either people who are carrying wearable or are having wearable digital AI recording devices, or are able to, just place. I use something called Plaud, and I don't know if you ever heard of Plaud, Plaud, and they don't pay me for this, and maybe they should, but I use this kind of credit card size thing called Plaud, and for those of you who are watching, I'm showing it there. It's like, it is the size of a credit card. This thing will record 30 hours of information, and if you're in a crowded room and there's multiple people speaking, it does an amazing job of recording the transcript accurately and figuring it all out, and then generating a report based on that transcript. So what if you could place these strategically in different locales, and you have each city council or town hall meeting basically covered by a couple of hundred of these Plaud devices around the country. Could be a different device, just saying Plaud. And then you have a steady stream, and almost like a database, if you will, of town hall transcripts that are happening at every level. And you could put that you could put it in one place, and then you could generate local news as accurately as you possibly could, because without being there, because you'd have transcripts, and with a lot of caveats, and just withholding any emotional editorial information, because you're not there, you can't see people's faces, nothing like this, but just reporting what happened.
I think we're probably I think we're moving towards something like that. That's kind of where I was. I think the only challenge is you would have to figure out a way to disclose that. So the difference between, this happens in courtrooms now, you can't film it. And I don't even think you can record in a lot of courtrooms. For some you can,
Not courtrooms. It wouldn't be like it would. Well, I mean, if it's public information, it's different. But like town hall meetings are broadcast, right?
Exactly. Well, that's kind of where I'm going. I think long as people know that they're being taped and for broadcast, then I think you're going to that. I still think you probably need some sort of human filter to make sure that there is some accuracy in the data. But I don't doubt that that's where we're going, because it's already happening with people with cell phones. They're there and
they can record
it. They're recording it and uploading it anyway.
They can do the same. That's right. You could do the same thing with your voice memo on a phone. I mean, but it would take a couple extra steps. Look, and when you say you, I mean, you're clearly not talking to me, because I don't have any intention of doing this. I'm putting that idea out there for anybody who's enterprising enough. And all I ask is that you remember me when you make a fortune, if you ever do. But you have to deal with all the regulatory and, permission structures and everything you need to make that happen. No, thank you from my end. But, hey, I'm always open with these crazy ideas, and 90% of them will never work. That said, I'm not going to stop. But I know one idea that works really well. One idea that works really well is that if you need to know anything about public affairs, and if you need to know anything about what's going on in Washington, especially for brands, how they should be behaving or how they could be reacting to what's going on, the best idea you could possibly have is to talk to Emil Hill. That is an idea I know is a winner, because I've been talking to you now for an hour. But Emil, any last words before we wrap up?
I think this is the one thing I would leave with people. I think that there's a lot of economic uncertainty, and people and businesses in particular, consumers and businesses, don't normally function well in uncertainty. I think when you think about a stock price, you don't watch it for dips in the shift term. If you're a day trader, that's something completely different. But if you're investing in anything, you should think about the long haul. I'm not sort of sure where the economy is going or business. I think change is inevitable. I lived through the real estate bust in the mid-90s, the dot-com bust later, the
financial meltdown of 2000.
The financial meltdown. All those things passed. There was significant difficulty, but we got through those things. I think businesses, individuals, and communities around the country, I think you ought to hold on to your optimism. I think you should get active, but ride it, and this too shall pass.
I love that, ending on a very optimistic, cautiously optimistic note. And Emil Hill, look for Emil on LinkedIn. For sure, you can find him there. And the Creshiem Group, I think I'm not sure if you finished your website yet. Is that happening, or you're just?
I didn't.
Yeah.
I you can reach me at emil@thecreshiemgroup.com, or through my LinkedIn page. Daniel certainly knows how to get in touch with me.
Yeah, go through me.
I don't want all clients. I want some clients. And
of course.
So there's something to be said to be able to have people that are legitimately interested in a longer term opportunity. I'm always happy to talk. And I think this is a phenomenal podcast that you have.
Ooh,
and
love
I hope you invite me back again at some point soon.
Are you kidding? We only talked about 3 of the 10 things that are on my paper. So we've got more to talk about. But Emil, it's a pleasure to have gotten to know you in the past couple of months. It is even better, more of a pleasure to have you on the show. And I'm so glad that our listeners, will get to know you a little bit too. So thanks again for coming on, and we will speak again very shortly. I am 100% certain of that.